This lecture describes the origins of Judaism and relates those origins to a theory called the Axial Age to help us put Judaism into play on this larger landscape we are developing of the tumblers of history that the world religions have been. Anybody who is in the military can tell you that world religions are central to the organization and response required even of contemporary personnel. So, as global citizens, we're not only going to learn about Judaism, but I want you to have at play in your mind some of these larger pictures of the way these traditions evolved, developed, and tumbled together and apart. So, if we think back to where we've been with the 6500 BCE prehistoric origins of Hinduism, that's our most ancient tradition, then we can move forward. We move forward to 500 BCE, where we start with the Buddhist life, and we know that that happens at a time of, within Hinduism, where there's an internal questioning of the priestly Brahmanic castes, and the Upanishads and the Vedantas, the end of the Vedas, is a philosophical burgeoning of thought. And it is in that thought that the Buddha then breaks off. This is important to the issue of the Axial Age. So now let's move over to the Middle East and the origins of Judaism. We start in 1900, and as our book tells us, the information about Abraham and Sarah, about this prehistoric kind of time, is both a matter of history and legend, and it requires moving out of the Hebrew Bible in order to develop a more critical appreciation of this history. But we can roughly start then 1900 as the beginning of the age of the patriarchs, and we have Abraham and Sarah coming out of Mesopotamia. By 1600, Mesopotamia to Canaan. Let's have a look at this map here for a little bit of humor, because these images might actually help you retain this information, right? So here we have Mesopotamia, and these two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, are the kind of cradle of civilization. Is one of the great cities, and the Epic of Gilgamesh is a great epic and a precursor for many of the stories in the Hebrew Bible. The Epic of Gilgamesh, set in Mesopotamia, has stories of the first flood that have clearly influenced then the story of the first flood found in the Hebrew traditions. So there is our origin for Abraham and Sarah. At this point, the Semitic tribes are both pastoralists and semi-nomadic, or agriculturalists and semi-nomadic pastoralists. And these two head across for being instructed by God to go to Canaan. And then if we go back here to this one then, right? And they ultimately, the tribes here, when Canaan is suffering from a drought, head over to Egypt asking Joseph for help, right? So we have Joseph, and the Coat of Many Colors story has Joseph over in Egypt. He's received the benefits of his prophetic vision and ability to read dreams, and so is in a good position to help his brothers when they come and repent. Egypt is a good place for a while until internal Egyptians then reassume authority and enslave non-Egyptian people, at which point around 1200 we've got Moses sending the people out, and we've got something like 40 years of the Sinai, right? That's the Sinai Peninsula. 40 years of wandering before they cross the River Jordan and get back to Canaan. And then we get the conquest of Canaan, the creation of the kingdoms. And this is where I want you to step back now and think about this frame of the Axial Age to understand what's happening in Judaism and what's happening in that larger world of the development of religious traditions. So if we think of the Axial Age, I'm introducing it to class as a heuristic device for considering the origin and rise of Judaism. So a heuristic device, I'm taking it straight out of Wikipedia, refers to experience-based techniques for problem solving, learning, and discovery that find a solution which is not guaranteed to be optimal, but good enough for a given set of goals. The exhaustive search is impractical. Heuristic methods are used to speed up the process of finding a satisfactory solution via mental shortcuts to ease the cognitive load of making a decision. And so we are wanting to problem solve so that you, in the course of one semester, could actually come up with frames for understanding the development, the origin and development of these traditions. The idea of the Axial Age, developed by Karl Jaspers in the middle of the 20th century, as he's trying to make sense of a pattern he sees happening across global history in the years 800 to 200, is that the foundations of the world religions are happening across different areas. China, India, Persia, Judea, and Greece. And that those foundations are the ones upon which humanity still subsists. So what is the connection that I'm trying to forge between Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, and the Axial Age? It is this, that part of Jasper's theory about the Axial Age is that sufficient internal structures get developed in China, in India, in the Middle East, that produced a kind of institutionalization of priestly classes, and that those institutions also established the foundations for internal philosophical reflection, discussion, debate. And so one finds not so much the idea that these origins of these religions should be understood as something that pop out of the sky, but rather that religious traditions are deeply embedded in the socio-historical context of the establishment of civilizations and institutional structures, the production of sacred texts, perhaps. Now, people have said this Axial Age is, it's such a baggy theory, you can put anything you want in there and then you just have to leave out the stuff that doesn't make sense to it. While other people, like David Graeber, has said, here's what's real interesting about that, is that in all of these places, currency is being developed. So that the foundations upon which currency and economic exchange more broadly can be developed is coexistent with the development of religious traditions. This is quite interesting, again, to think that there could be relationships between the institutional and even internal questioning of a tradition at the same time as you have developed markets across which exchange, economic exchange, can be more fully developed. So it is simply a heuristic tool. We are not saying that it is adequate, and I'm not going to test you on the Axial Age. What I'm asking you to do is, I'm trying to provide for you, is a sense of the origins of Judaism in relationship to these other traditions. The next thing you want to tackle, terms Israel, Israelite, and the Jewish kingdoms. So to recap, what we want to look at here is thinking about the time frame of Judaism with our previous traditions happening off over in the Indian subcontinent. The idea that civilization, as marked by developments, including things like currency, seems to be related to the kinds of structures from which the foundations of major world religions were developing in similar ways. We recognize that the Axial Age is simply a heuristic device used for our purposes to help put these tumblers into play together, and that this fluid movement of people influenced by history and legend recorded in the Hebrew Bible is where we're heading this week. Cheers.